Hello everyone, my name is Jimmy Baxter, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than what I'm normally doing. We're going to be showing a tutorial series of how to go from After Effects to Fusion. And this is not an in-depth course of what Fusion does or all the little nuances. This is mainly for people who are veterans of the industry, who have been using After Effects for years, but need to convert over to something a little bit different, something like a node-based compositing system versus a layer-based compositing system. And so, but this entire course, we're going to break it down from the very beginning, from the interface to basic roto, layering, keying, tracking, pretty much the basic stuff that you usually use in After Effects or doing any kind of composites. So if you're not familiar with After Effects, this probably isn't the little mini course for you. This is a very guerrilla style, get what you need to know so you can start comping right away. And there are plenty of videos online to show you exactly what all this little stuff does, and all the little buttons and all the things like that do. I'm not showing you that. I'm just showing you how to get started right away with comping, so you can start doing your work in Fusion coming from After Effects. Okay, so now that we're in Fusion here, this landscape may look a little alien to you, but it won't here in a few minutes. This is actually pretty simple once we get into it and you understand exactly what all this stuff is. So where you'll be living mostly is this area right down here where the grid is, and over here where the inspector panel is. Alright, so if you don't have the inspector panel, just click on that. We'll go over these in a minute, but these two items is where you'll be living mostly. This item up here, this big double space here, if you don't see a double space and only see one space, click on this little button to split it. Alright, these are your views. So in After Effects, we have, let's go ahead and reset this. All right, so we have two views. We have our layer view or footage view and our comp view. And Fusion, we don't have that. They're just views. You can put whatever you want in there. You can put your footage, you can put your layer, the effect you're working on, you can put whatever you want in here, so it doesn't care. Also, you have, within each view, you have a secondary view. You have an A-B switch, which is similar to our take a picture, and we have, so we can do that. So that's what this is for, and each view has one of these, so you essentially have 4 different views. Okay, so what do we want to look at first? First thing we want to look at is this tab up here. As you get more and more comps, more and more tabs will appear over here. The way Fusion works, it doesn't have comps within comps within comps, like pre-comps, like Andrew Kramer does. Instead, you have just one comp for one project. And if you need to pre-comp, it doesn't actually do that. We'll get that into that with the compositing video later, but this will indicate whatever projects you got open, they'll appear up there. In this case, we don't have any open, you just have the default. View, edit, all this stuff here, this is pretty standard for any other program that you might be used to, Fusion, After Effects, or not Fusion, but Nuke or After Effects or whatever. File, edit, view, tools we'll get to in a minute, scripts, which you probably won't get into, windows, you can float these windows, but not really important to get really right into compositing. To get right into compositing, the ones that you will need is probably your tools and this bar down in here. Okay, now but before we get into this bar, let's go over the bar right before it. All right, so this is your timeline for your entire comp. Right now, by default, it's 1 to 1,000. These outer numbers here, this one here, and this here in this little section, that's your global numbers. All right, those are your global comp settings. So is your comp 5 frames long, 20 frames long, 130 frames long? That's what that is. These numbers is your working or your render range area, much like this bar right here in After Effects. All right, render button, pretty self-explanatory. Audio, the audio really sucks in this program. Your playhead, which is pretty much the same as any other play system that you got, pretty self-explanatory. This confuses people, and it even confuses me, especially coming from Nuke and After Effects. The way they do these is this automatically sets everything to proxy. This only proxies anything that it needs to. It decides what it wants to do. Whereas if you do click on this, it'll force everything. High quality and motion blur, again, those buttons are basically the combination of this button and these two parts of this button. Okay, so if you right click on either one of these, you can see what resolution you're going to be going down to, a third, quarter, half, or a fifth of the resolution, etc., etc. When you're playing in a big comp or messing around in a big comps, I usually turn these off, let it do its thing with auto proxy. Now in After Effects, when we think about proxies, we actually need a proxy file to link up to this. So you have a little box over here that indicates proxies. Fusion, you don't need to. You can, but you don't need to. It automatically down-reses your stuff for you, which makes it all that much more confusing. So how do you bring something in? Well, that would be this row here. We won't go into most of this. We're only going to stay within these first two sections here, or these two items in this first section. Your read node, which is how you bring something in. Alright, so that's how you bring it in. To view it, you can either drag it up, oops, there we go, drag it up, like that, or hit the number key 1 on top of your keypad. Not the keypad, number pad, but on top of the letter Q, that number 1. So number 2 will put you in the second window. And if you have a third monitor, which I do, which you can't see, it puts it into the third monitor. All right, so that's one of three ways you can put those in there. The other way is to just drag it up there. All right, so let's turn that off and just drag it up there. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn both those off. And then the other way is to very carefully hit those buttons, which I don't think anybody ever actually does. This is only to indicate what view this particular item is on. Okay, so now how do we set our comp length? Well, when we do it in After Effects, which is one thing I love about After Effects, is you make a comp, it automatically sets your in point and your out point for you. Fusion doesn't do that by default. It does let you know how long that footage is by this little gray area. You can also look over here in your inspector to indicate. To set your comp length, remember what I said, this is your global numbers, these two outset numbers, 1, 2, 81. So now my comp is 81 frames long with my little puppet guy. All right, if I want to play just frame, let's say 10 to 60. All right, as you can see, I didn't change my comp length. I just changed the playhead. So there we go. Just like doing it here, going to frame 10, hitting B, going to frame 60, hitting N, hitting 0. All right, so that is that. Okay, so that's what these little numbers over here, more detailed information on what those are. Okay, so let's talk about animating and things like that real quick. Now we'll go over more detail of this when we start animating and doing other things, but as a general rule, this is an overview of everything. So we're used to animating, let's say the position with the little stopwatch, come over here, move it down, and we have our little animated guy. In Fusion, all this stuff here gets put into a node, which is this, transform. All right, we'll go over this a little bit more detailed when we do composite work, but this is what I really wanted to show you, is what all this stuff information means. All right, every time you see a little diamond, that means it's keyable. So let's come over here, hit the key button. All right, and we've just put a keyframe there, so if you move out of the way, you can see the keyframe. All right, so let's come down here and move it. All right, just like in After Effects, we get our line, and it made an automatic keyframe there when we moved it, just like in After Effects. Now you're thinking, well, why don't I see it actually moving? Well, that's the thing with Fusion. It all depends on these little dots, or whatever you have selected. All right, in this case, the dots indicating that's what's being viewed. So in order to view this one, just like I showed you how to put something in a viewer, you can drag it up, hit the number key, or hit the little button there. I hate doing that. I'm not doing that anymore. So 1 or 2. So 1 and 2. All right. So That's why you didn't see it over in this window. And that's something that you kind of have to get used to when dealing with Fusion. Unlike After Effects, whatever's in your comp is what shows. Whatever's in your node isn't what's always being showed. So you always got to double check yourself by doing that. Or if you wanted the first one, do that. Okay, so that is that. Now, how do you actually see your keyframes? Okay, I see them there on the timeline. If I double click, I see them there on the timeline, but I want to animate them or move them around like I do here. I just want to move this to here. How do I do that? Well, you got this panel called keyframes. So let's go ahead and close the panel there. Leave it open. So by default, it's set to all. Go ahead on what's selected. Double click, twirl down, and there they are. They're right there. But you have to zoom in. F. There it is. Control F. I keep forgetting that. Control F frames everything up for you. So now I can come in here and move it around, grab one of these, move it around, just like we do in After Effects. But I wanted to maybe adjust this curve a bit so it's not so ease in, ease out, and I want to just make it linear. Well, that's what this button's for. Alright, displacement, and there we have it. So grab these, and these are your controls for that. So I can make it linear on both ends, or I can make it ease in, or ease out, or ease out, ease in. So there's that. Right. Control F frames everything up. We won't go over this right now. This is when we get down to animating and things like that. But that's how you adjust the splines and adjust the keyframes for your whatever it is you're animating. The next thing I do want to show you is kind of important. Is the preferences. Now by default, whatever you put in here and render out is what the frame size is going to be and the frame rate. So, but to set things specifically, like if you're going to do a huge project that requires like 4K or 2K or whatever, you need to set those in the preferences if you're going to have multiple projects, so you don't accidentally send something out at the wrong frame rate. All right, so in the preferences, you see a global and a composition. So Fusion kind of, it's good and bad swords. Each composition has their own preferences, so you can actually set up its own frame rate and frame size. I hardly ever use that, mainly because it automatically gets set when you create your own project or a new project, and those settings are based off of the global ones. There's a bunch of stuff in here I'm not going to go over, but what you do need to be concerned with is this one here, the frame format. So this sets your frame of your composites from this point on. Your frame rate is at 1:1. It's going to be anamorphic. If not, you obviously change that to 2. And your color depth rendering out. You want to make sure your full render is set to 16-bit, especially if you're doing DPX, EXRs, or anything that's log or floating point. So your preview and your interactive doesn't really matter. You can keep it at 8-bit, saves a little bit of memory, but yeah, that's how I set mine. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell on what all the basic stuff is for you to get comping with. You can go online and find out all the details of what all this other stuff is. They're online. There's plenty of videos out there to find out what all that stuff means. But for us coming from After Effects to Fusion, understanding this a basic interface, this is pretty much all you need. And in the next video, we're going to start building our first comp. All right, so I'll see you there.